Our next guest says that President-elect Barack Obama must have a systemic approach to fixing this housing crisis. Well, what should our upcoming president do? Joining us now is Jim Randel, the author of The Skinny on the Housing Crisis, What Everyone Homeowner and Home Buyer Needs to Know. What do we need to know? Well, because let's just wrap up some of the news we've gotten today. Citigroup on the case, getting ready to rework hundreds of thousands of mortgages potentially. You've got Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac getting ready to do the same. Is that going to be enough to right the housing market, give us some stability here?
Well, I'd like to say yes, but I'm not sure it will. Part of the problem isn't just the modification of existing mortgages in trouble. There's also this buyer psychology that, you know, in late September and October, the housing market has been pretty much flatlined. And so modifying existing mortgages is certainly part of the problem, but how do we get the buyers back into the market? How do we encourage a buyer psychology?
But is that really the government's responsibility here? Should the government, instead of wading deeper into this mess, try and step away from this mess sooner rather than later?
Well, the government, in my opinion, is trying to save the economy. We've got a problem, and they're doing all sorts of things that might be a little out of the box, such as addressing the auto industry and other industries. I think, yeah, the government does have some responsibility to address the consumer confidence, which is at decades, you know, low for decades.
Jim, Adam Shapiro is sitting here because he's covering this story, and he gets fired up on this stuff too.
I want to go back to this whole concept of writing down mortgages. We now have some of the nation's largest banks doing that for mortgages they hold. But the common complaint that we hear from these banks is we can't do it for the mortgages we service, and that's usually the majority of what their business. Well, the Citibank only holds 20% of the mortgages they service. And the complaint we keep hearing is that Fannie and Freddie are among the investors that put up the obstacle to reworking the mortgages. Because Fannie and Freddie aren't going to rework the mortgages. They're going to have the banks that service those mortgages do it, correct?
Yes.
So will Fannie and Freddie, have they been the hurdle that has stopped mass loan modification across the country, the way the FDIC, Sheila Bair, has been calling for the last year?
I don't think Fannie and Freddie is the problem. As you know, with these securitizations, these mortgages are sliced and diced and packaged in ways that sometimes nobody even knows who owns an existing mortgage, a single mortgage. So the servicers, the banks, are saying, gee, we can't modify the securitized portfolio that we're servicing. They have Fannie and Freddie and a lot of other investors who have competing interests.
But if you have Fannie and Freddie later this afternoon when they have their press conference say, look, we're going to get out of the way. If a bank wants to modify among the guidelines that have been proposed, and FDIC is doing this through the IndyMac program, you know, a debt-to-income ratio of 38% or less. If Fannie and Freddie get out of the way and say, do it, to the banks that are servicing mortgages, will we see mass loan modification across the country?
I don't think Fannie and Freddie has the power to give approval for the kind of numbers you're talking about. I think that Fannie and Freddie does have some interest in some of these securities and large interests, but there are a lot of investors all over the world who have interest in these securities, and the servicers are unsure how to act, and they're worried about their own liability in some cases.
They literally don't have the infrastructure to deal with this tsunami of problems. I want to ask, though, what do you want from the government? Do you want a tax break for first-time home buyers? I mean, you want more breaks for people? You already, I mean, isn't that what got us into this in the first place in a way? You can write off the mortgage interest deduction. You had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac behind conforming mortgages.
What do I want? We have a downward spiral on housing prices. We have a very low consumer confidence. When the government wanted to, I'll use an analogous situation, encourage people to rehabilitate historic properties, it came up with this plan for tax credits, which actually worked very, very well, increased deductions. So that's an example of just maybe one out-of-the-box thought. Let's implement some tax credits. Let's increase some deductions to encourage first-time home buyers, to encourage buyers to come back into the market. We got people in this kind of gridlock right now. We got to do some creative things to break it.
Just one last question on the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. I hate to be a dead horse on this one, but Fannie and Freddie, can they modify loans on their own? Don't they have to do it through the banks, or can they set up their own program?
I think they can set up their own. They have a portfolio of loans. They not only own loans, they own mortgage securities. Earlier you were asking me about mortgage securities. As to the loans they own in their portfolio, absolutely. They can do what Sheila Bair, the FDIC, has been telling them.
And they have enough to make an impact? They hold enough?
Well, we have 42 million homeowners in the United States with a mortgage. In today's news, it said that 7.5 million are underwater and another 2+ million or
Right.
soon to be underwater. So that's 10 million out of 42 million that are in trouble. That's a lot of
I saw
people.
some regions out west where 90%, 80% of the mortgages in some areas are underwater in some towns.
90% in one town in California.
Front page of the New York Times. It
Yeah.
was great to see you. Please come back. We can talk about this all day. Jim Randel. He's author of The Skinny on the Housing Crisis. Go get it. And Adam Shapiro, but he's here every day, every hour. He'll be
Thanks,
in the
Jim.
next hour.